Day number 51 was supposed to be broadcast and it did not. I set it to do a broadcast, but we obviously have technical difficulties, and we're still working those out. So we're going to stick with this stream. So if we miss a day, no big deal. Like I said, we get to make them up, okay? So for our day 51 of the happiness challenge, I'm going to give you guys some smudging too. Feel you proximally. Smudging all of you. There we go. So for day 51, here we are. We are building off of previous days in which we were examining ourselves a little bit, right? In the previous days, we were asked to look at ourselves and what is our hero journey asking of us to change. And the reason we do that exercise is to understand that the hero journey we've projected, and we have an idea of what the outcome of this hero journey might be, right? The interactions that we might have, and the wisdom and the glory that we might gain from it, right? The accomplishment that we might feel or be able to, what service we might be able to bring to the world around us, right? And this gives us an idea of like, oh, it requires this type of qualities, these types of skills, right? So today, we're going to do a little bit more self-examination for 51, technically yesterday, but for today. And we want to be able to look at this in the sense that 95% of who we are is ingrained within our tissues. It's automatic and it's subconscious, okay? We don't really have to think about it to activate it. It just exists as it is because our body is this magical thing that has enough connections within it, much like a computer, to automate things, okay? So when we see certain sensories or when we perceive certain things in our environment, they are translated within us, okay? It's a very subconscious thing that we do, and it could happen to do with like the temperature that we feel on our skin, or it might be about something that we see with our eyes. All of these things that we perceive in the outside world, the way that we think about them, the way that we understand them, is based on the programming that we have going on up here and then within the tissues of our body, right? We already know that nerves go throughout the whole body, and whenever there's a whole bunch of them, they actually communicate with each other quasi without any direction from our brains at all, right? And a lot of it actually is dictated from our heart as well. We have a lot of nerves around our heart, and new science, it's a heart math science, is coming out to tell us that we have a second brain, kinda, that helps us to understand our body and the world around us a little bit more, right? So for today, we're going to begin to utilize the 5% of us that is spontaneous, that is choice, that is directed from the consciousness that we experience in our bodies and in this lens that we are, and then we see the world around us. And the consciousness that we experience is limited somewhat by the hardware that we have, right? The kind of programming that we have, all the wirings that we go, and if we are, let's say, wired a different way, then we will act, think, and look completely different from somebody else. Yet it still comprises us and allows a consciousness to take place, to experience the world, right? Science is still out on exactly how to define consciousness, but the more important thing that we need to do to be able to navigate the world and understand how to create a life full of meaning and that brings us joy and happiness is to understand that our consciousness is extremely powerful, and it has to do with like the choices that we make in certain degrees, to where like our ambitions come up. Yes, those are influenced by the let's say limitations of our programming, but we understand now that the programming that we have is completely malleable. Even your personality is malleable. Okay, we understand that like our taste buds change, so why wouldn't we think that our personality would as well? Perhaps when you were a kid, you liked one color more than another. Why was that? Right? Probably from your outward stimuli on your internal world. Very powerful. And to think that we stop exuding that type of change is very naive, and we oftentimes get convinced of the nature. So a lot of us, we get stuck, so to speak, and we don't think that we can move forward because we're stuck in this little box. And that is the lie. That is the biggest lie. We can completely change, and this is part of the process. So the entire time I've been bringing us through this gradual change to understand how powerful of a being we are, how much change we can do, and what influences why we want to go through, why we want to go and exist within this world. And part of that is meaning, and so we are exploring this hero journey. What am I here to do? And that's a choice, right? We could shift our understanding, our consciousness. Let's say, if we were to focus on, if we wanted to be somebody who enjoyed helping animals, so to speak, helping maybe be a veterinarian, all we would have to do was subject ourselves to a myriad of experiences that positively impact the building and the rewiring of our brain to interact within that space. And we would need to find joy in that space for us to want to take that on, right? We would have to find and understand meaning. And generally, that is created because the power of our will and our consciousness. When we have a choice, it flows into the world around us, thus creating the reality that we exist with, right? There's myriads of new scientific evidence to show that our brains can be fooled. And really, all that we experience is the best guess that our brain can come up with the world around us. So if we modify this, we modify this. Everything else around us, right? We modify everything. So what we are going to explore today are the aspects of self. Okay, what makes up the self? And the reason why we want to do this is because it can help us to delineate areas of our lives, aspects of our lives that influence the self, the idea of who we are. The more that we have a sense of self, the more confidence we feel, the more trust we have within the world around us, the more that we're able to navigate and experience the world around us as well. If we don't have a very good sense of self, oftentimes we are confused, we don't have confidence, we feel lonely, all of these things. It's kind of like when we lack a certain degree of, let's say, balance or homeostasis within one of these aspects, we experience the negative parts of that, or the repercussions of that. So an example could be, if I don't have a very good understanding of my physical self, perhaps I don't have very good proprioception, and that just means the ability to sense the world around me and like not knock into things. Like I can understand spatial awareness from my body to another object, okay? It helps us to pick things up, all of that kind of stuff. If you have aspects of your physicality that we cannot connect with, such as perhaps we don't have very good sight, that affects our ability to have proprioception, right? And so we might not understand how to move around, and that would require us to rewire our brains so that we could have proprioception. And this is very evident because just because we can't see doesn't mean that we can't navigate the world around us, right? We develop other senses to a more powerful degree to be able to experience the world around us, thus still giving us proprioception. Again, more evidence for malleability. So when we look at the self again, there are 6 attributes that we can examine. It's behavior, so our behavior, our socialness, our physicalness, our emotionalness, our mentalness, and our spiritualness, okay? These 6 things comprise the self. And they all kind of influence one another too, because the self, of course, once we get a little bit more science on consciousness, we will begin to understand how that kind of construct works, and we will begin to navigate the adoption or the rightness of self, okay? And so, let me give you a little more context to break this down, because what we're going to do is just examine who we are in regards to each one of these things. So, excuse me, within your share, when you share this video, you're going to describe what makes up your behavioral self. what are some common things? We don't need to go into encyclopedic knowledge of this, but this is a nice exercise to really allow us to unfold, okay? And as we're going in through our world, we can just be aware and practice our awareness of how things are unfolding. So, such as our social self. We can get experience of what that is like via feedback from the world, from social interactions, right? The same thing with physical self. Are we a physical being? Do we move around, or these things? Do we have a hard time moving around? Okay, those are areas where we go, yes, I'm a very physical being. I can understand. Perhaps you're so physical that you are able to get a sense of what it means when you have a certain type of hunger. Right? Your body will signal to us what types of nutrients it needs. And when we are completely aware, or we become more aware of the body, the physical self, we can better take care of it. And when we don't have that, then we put in things that aren't very good for us, and we can see the ramifications of that. Thus, what I just explained earlier. So the behavior, our behavioral self, is how we act, we perform from moment to moment. We may be aware of it, or we may not. And oftentimes, when we are unaware of it, it's a good idea to be like, oh, I didn't realize that I acted this way, or that it looked like this. Like, I'm a very goofy individual, and every time I see a video of me, I go, oh my goodness, I can't believe I acted like that. But I enjoy that kind of behavior. It's fun, it's quirky, it kind of is what makes myself, right? Without it, or if I wanted to, I could reprogram that by actively engaging in behaviors, so that certain behaviors that would give me emotional experiences that would then rewrite the said programming that is within my tissues, and I would stop doing those behaviors. We've talked about building a habit before. That's exactly the process of doing something like that, right? And so that is one aspect. So the social self, oops, my little notes are going down. Just one sec. So the social self, we are social human beings, okay? Our species demands that we be social. We would not survive if we did not have this ability. And all of us need it to a certain varying degree based on the hardwiring, the creation of our programs, and the hardwiring that we get as we experience the world from when we are born until we become more conscious of who we are and have that experience of consciousness. But as a social being, we must have social interactions to understand the importance of them, to understand, does this feel good? And we also understand, we get a value of who we are in relation to another person. We understand how our socialness influences the other person and how they also influence us. And so this is a two-way street. When we lack social interactions, we actually feel disconnected from the world around us. And we might feel that in the form of, like, let's say, loneliness, depression, things like that, okay? And what it does is it actually prevents us from understanding or feeling more whole as a self when we don't have those things. So, and also, there might be a case of some of us don't have very good programming when it comes to being able to have social interactions. That is also based on it's based on the mental aspect of the self, okay, and the emotional aspect. So like I said, a lot of these overlap. So just an example, if we have social anxiety, that was created by environmental circumstances that signaled to us at some point in our life that doing X, Y, and Z would cause suffering or pain, right? A lot of times, it's when we have engaged in those things, the reactions have diminished the self. And so we've gone into protective mode and created programming that stops us from doing that further. But the question is, did we have the mental capacity to actually understand what we were experiencing? Most of us have not. And that's okay, right? We're not all geniuses in all of these aspects. But, excuse me, talking so much. Can see why this video did not load. It's very long and there's a lot to it. So, and so we can understand that, well, maybe my perception of the interactions that I've had isn't the full picture, again, because our ability to understand what's happening on the outside world depends on the programming on the inside. And if something is a little if it's there and it's not for our greatest and highest good, such as it creates the perception that what we've done is wrong when it really is benign or it was good, then we can understand how that's a little bit of a mix-up. And so we can see that when we have social interactions, or if we think that we are afraid of being in the social aspect, perhaps there's a sense of one of these other aspects that has influenced the solidification of another one. Okay? So the next one, again, is our physical self. So it's the body that we live in. I gave an example of being able to communicate to the nutritional needs of our body, and that is a very real thing. This is also, how do I say, the physical body is very important for the rest of the aspects of ourself, because it allows us to engage in those things. So we get to move in our environment. And when we don't have a very good sense of the physical self, then we hinder the rest of the aspects as well, okay? So understanding that maybe I need movement, or if we understand that I have certain pains in my body, all of let's say, a lot of the pains and the conditions that we experience in life are actually caused from built up energies or emotions or things that affect our physical body in a negative way. And so inflammation happens. So science has already shown that shame causes inflammation in the body, and that can have issues with our digestion. It can have issues with how we filter toxins, how we take in nutrients. So that's a really big aspect to understand, is like, wow, if I understand that I am experiencing shame, then it's going to affect my physical body. So again, these things overlap. So moving down, we go to the emotional self, which is perfect, just talking about shame. But when we experience emotions, we describe them as having a feeling, okay? It's because it's the best language that we have to be able to describe the world around us, and we use the word feeling. Our emotions can be physical or they can be non-physical. So I might be able to sense something in my body, and I'm feeling this, and it's causing this type of emotion to arise. Pain could be one, but sometimes let's just go into, maybe I've had what I deem to be a strenuous social interaction, and then I feel inside pain, but it's not a physical pain, right? But I feel it as a physical pain. Excuse me, what that is actually describing of us is that I actually am hurt. My emotions are hurt, and so I describe that as a feeling. And so when we navigate this aspect of it, we can understand, do I exhibit healthy emotions? Are these emotions that I'm experiencing for my greatest and highest good? Or are they things that cause me to not experience the world around me, okay? Are they things that keep me isolated? So it's big to understand the emotional self. There's other aspects of this too, but we could talk about emotions for a long time. Then we go into the mental self. This one is really big, and it does influence the rest of course, the aspects, but it's our ability to process and make sense of the inner and the outer world, right? So whenever we focus our attention, when we focus our attention, that creates mind. So when we focus our attention on like our hand, so to speak, we are activating through our consciousness, we're actively activating the nerve endings in that space, because I'm physically going to feel my attention there. Perhaps I get to feel my heartbeat in my hand, so to speak, because I'm paying more attention. I'm being more mindful of this space, right? And then that's the term of mindfulness. So our thoughts, it's our attention focusing on a wide range of simple and complex sensations, ideas, images, memories, perceptions, judgments, decisions, beliefs, expectations, assumptions, and conclusions. Huge list. So we could go on and on and on about the mental self. But to understand that it's basically the ability to make sense of the world around us. If some of our mental programming is not equipped enough, or we need to expand it, we will understand that we will see a deficit in this. Part of this, when we see optical illusions, okay, oftentimes our brain will make a decision about what it's seeing based on the programming that it has. And you can go ahead and look at optical illusions on the internet. You'll find a whole bunch of things that really warp our sense of reality. And so it's very powerful to understand that the mind is also malleable because we can learn. In addition, the mind helps us to understand our physical body. Very powerful, right? Just because we can actually look at something such as a fake hand, and if we have it around us or close to us enough, we will actually think that it's our hand, and we'll have reactions to it based that it could be our hand. Very interesting. There's some studies out there for that too. The last one is the spiritual self, and this is the degree to the connection regarding the world around us, the interactions that we have in it. So it's what gives us a sense of meaning, a sense of perhaps otherworldliness, a sense of how do I say this? We can understand how we feel joy, okay? Because when we're spiritually connected, we can relate to the things around us. We feel like they are part of us and we are part of them. So it's a connection. When our spiritual self is cut off, it's huge, and it's really a lot of suffering takes place. And perhaps you've heard of somebody who, this is powerful stuff, perhaps you've heard of somebody who says that they have a black thumb or a green thumb. That's an interesting way to describe a connection or a disconnection to the world around us. And it could just be that I don't have at the moment the programming that allows me to perceive through the mental space the needs of something else, right? And that could be an empathy of some form. Or I do. And if I have a green thumb, perhaps it's really not something that we can dictate on how to do, but internally we have this huge education on what it is that I'm looking at, right? And so when we say we have a black thumb, that just means that I don't have that internal education of what that is. But we can adopt that. We could learn what it's like. Super simple. And like I said, when we have this feeling of spirituality, we feel meaning and connection to the world a little bit more. This could mean the contributions in a social situation because we can see the outcomes of it. And then we feel this connection. It's very powerful. So in your share, go ahead and look at the different aspects that make you you. Okay? Again, you have yourself, and that's comprised of a whole bunch of things, including consciousness, but our behavior, our social self, the physical self, the emotional self, our mental self, and the spiritual self, okay? So examine who are you in that space, and maybe you can get a degree of understanding, and then we'll just sit with that for a bit, okay? This exercise might take you a day or two, and that's fine. And the cool thing is that the next exercises are going to be super simple once we've done this one. So without any ado, I will say light and love, namaste, and I'm going to get on to day 52 right now. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.